The next morning, Alias awoke to the sound of birdsong and the faint rustle of leaves outside. It was a stark contrast to the usual eerie stillness that surrounded the church. Stretching, he noticed the boy as always sitting on the steps, watching the forest with a quiet intensity. The sight had become almost comforting. Alias grabbed his satchel and approached. "I'm going to figure out how far this barrier stretches today. Might give me some answers about what's holding you here." The boy turned to look at him, his expression neutral but attentive. Alias wasn't sure if the boy understood, but it didn't matter. He had to try something. He stepped out into the clearing, his movements deliberate as he headed toward the edge of the church grounds. The boy followed a few paces behind, his presence a silent shadow. Alias stopped just short of the tree line and turned back. "All right, here goes nothing." Alias took a cautious step forward. At first, nothing happened. The air was still, the forest quiet. He took another step, then another. Suddenly, a chill washed over him, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. A sense of wrongness seeped into his skin, like he'd crossed an invisible threshold. Before he could react, a strong hand grabbed his arm and yanked him back. Alias stumbled, nearly losing his footing, and turned to see the boy gripping him tightly. The boy's wide eyes and furrowed brow conveyed more than words ever could. "Don't go." All right, Alias said, raising his hands in surrender. "I get it. It's dangerous." The boy's grip loosened, but he didn't let go entirely until Alias had taken several steps back toward the church. Once inside the perceived safety of the barrier, the boy finally released him and turned away, his shoulders tense. Alias exhaled deeply. "Guess I owe you for that one." "Thanks." The boy glanced at him briefly before resuming his vigil near the steps. Alias couldn't shake the feeling that the boy's actions had just saved his life. Later that day, Alias found himself examining the church's interior once again. The boy's sudden intervention had only deepened the mystery. What was out there? Why was the boy so adamant about staying within the barrier? And most importantly, what had created the barrier in the first place? He wandered over to the mural depicting the robed figure holding back the shadows. Something about it tugged at his mind, as though the answer were just out of reach. He traced the glowing object in the figure's hand, wondering if it was the key to everything. The boy appeared in the doorway, watching him silently. Alias turned and gestured toward the mural. "You're tied to this place, aren't you? To whatever is keeping those shadows at bay." The boy's expression didn't change, but he stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the mural. He reached out and touched the glowing object, then pointed to himself. Alias's heart skipped a beat. "It's you," he murmured. "You're the one holding the shadows back." The boy nodded once, his movements deliberate. Alias stared at him, a mix of awe and disbelief swirling in his chest. "How long have you been doing this? And why? What's keeping you bound here?" As expected, there was no verbal answer, but the boy's gaze softened, and for a moment, Alias thought he saw a flicker of sadness in his eyes. Whatever had happened, it wasn't by choice. Alias took a step closer. "I don't know if I can fix this," he said honestly. "But I'll try. You don't have to face this alone." The boy tilted his head slightly, as though considering Alias's words. Then, with a small nod, he turned and walked back outside. Alias watched him go, determination hardening in his chest. Whatever it took, he would find a way to help. That night, the boy seemed restless. He sat by the fountain, tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. Alias joined him, his curiosity piqued. "What are you drawing?" The boy paused and pointed to one of the symbols he'd drawn, a spiral with radiating lines. Then he tapped his chest. Alias frowned, trying to piece together the meaning. Is that your name? The boy didn't react but continued drawing, adding new symbols alongside the first. Alias studied them carefully, realizing they seemed to represent ideas or identities rather than words. He decided to mimic the boy's method, drawing a simple circle to represent himself. When he tapped the circle and pointed to his chest, the boy's lips quirked into a faint smile. It was the first real connection Alias had felt all day, and it bolstered his resolve. They might not share a language, but they were finding ways to understand each other. Slowly but surely. As the stars emerged and the forest fell silent, Alias sat beside the boy, their companionship unspoken but undeniable. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was no longer facing them alone.